Welcome back to the panel discussion, Mobile Device Management, Securing Your Agency's Information, sponsored by Accelera Solutions and NetApp on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. I'm your host, Jason Miller. Our guests today are Mark Googe, Chief Technology Officer of the Defense Health Agency, Gary Barlett, CIO of the Postal Service's Inspector General Office, Joe Brown, President of Accelera Solutions, and Ken Liska, Virtualization Solutions Specialist for the U.S. Public Sector NetApp. So before break, we're just getting into the security discussion. I think that's an important discussion because I think, as we've heard from Joe and others, that seems to be sometimes the biggest stumbling block to really take full advantage of virtualization. Now, Gary, you mentioned at the very beginning that the Postal Service IG's office was heading down the path of a virtual desktop VDI. You guys are starting to implement it. How do you make sure, as Mark talked about, that the policy and the actual use of it don't conflict? And then as Ken talked about, sometimes it makes things harder. How have you guys made sure it doesn't make things harder?
So as we've been going through this, and that's one of the things I encourage people to do is make sure you do a pilot, because that's where you're going to learn your lessons. If you think that you're just going to launch right into this and you've already figured everything out ahead of time, you're making a mistake. So as we've gone through the pilot, we've learned a lot of lessons, and we've realized that we've got policies that had to be rewritten. So we've got plenty of policies that have gone through quite an evolutionary change. As Ken mentioned, you look at some of the policies and they just don't make sense when we're not talking about a physical machine anymore. We're talking about, policies that say don't plug your work laptop into a home port. Well, guess what? It is my home machine. That doesn't work anymore. So going through and sitting down with the security folks, sitting down with the lawyers, I would encourage, make sure the lawyers are in the conversation, make sure your HR personnel are in the conversation, because this is a wholesale rewrite of policy. So that's the process we've gone through that wholesale rewrite of policy, making sure that it meets the HR needs, the legal needs, the IT needs, especially the security folks. But it's almost a complete rewrite. Trying to use your old policies just isn't going to work anymore. Was there one or two policies that just come to mind right off the bat that you say, wow, that was a tough road, but we got down it and got through it? Is there anything that stands out? Probably when you look at policies that talk about, use of coming from a military background, the infamous USB devices, and policies that govern, thou shalt not use USB devices, thou shalt not use your home printer, those types of things that were just clear mandates of what you could not do. Well, guess what? Now all of a sudden you're on a home computer, and if you need to print, you've got to figure out ways to allow people to use home printers, because that's the only printer that they have. They may never have access to a government provided printer anymore. So the ability to plug in USB devices to transfer files, whether it's something I provided or something that they're using, you've got to start to make adaptations of those things. Those are the things that drive the security people, crazy. Because they come from a mindset of everything's evil, don't plug anything in. Well, if you're on your home machine, you already have those things plugged in. So you just have to figure out secure ways to deal with them and policy ways to deal with them, and just accept the fact that the world has changed and you have to change with it. Now, is your VDI? I've heard this before. This term PC on a stick. Is that the type of VDI you're using, or is it a different kind? No, we're using purely whether it's through an application that you can download. Or through web browser. We're sticking to that right now. That PC on a stick gets a little more complicated, I think. You have to always worry about making sure the images are refreshed and those types of things. So we're sticking to that. It's just a matter of using the technology that's built into the solutions that allow you to do things like thin printing. That allow you to access a home printer, but not worry about having all those drivers and all that extraneous software that comes with home printers loaded into the image. Being able to allow that technology to allow you to adapt to the new environment, I think that's critical. Let me turn to Mark, because you have a secondary set of challenges when you try to talk about using VDI and then security policy. DoD is much more secure in many respects and much more worried about security than maybe a lot of other agencies. How have you guys kind of shifted to say we need to change our security policies to match the changes in technology?
Yeah, so working really closely, again, as a tenant on the larger network that we reside, is working with a lot of the people who do the architecture for the mobile device management by really putting in good fidelity on use cases to meet our mission needs, so that we can evolve as a whole, that they understand the spectrum I have to deliver to from a healthcare environment, and then they can put the policies up there from the DoD CIO's office that we can follow. So it's a very, again, takes a village to raise a child kind of thing. So it's an ever evolving. But if I don't do our due diligence about representing the healthcare and what our IT needs are for our business cases to the CIO's office, so that the construction of those policies and architecture we can be compliant with. So I mean, that's a lot of it is just communications and constantly talking about us as a portfolio. Now that we're a defense healthcare agency, that spectrum is spread a lot more for what we need to do.
Now, let me turn to Joe for a second. When you talk about security, when we talk about cloud and virtualization and mobility, FedRAMP has to come into play. And we know a lot that FedRAMP is that baseline standard for securing cloud services. Where does that meet up with the spot between virtualization and mobility? Where does FedRAMP come into play?
FedRAMP, is a set of policies and controls that have to be, wrapped around your cloud environment, really, right? So the cloud provider is required to adhere to a set of policies, which include basic things like change management, all the way up through certain types of security technologies and capabilities that have to be applied to the cloud environment. So it's a broad spectrum of controls and policies that a cloud provider has to adhere to. It is an arduous process. It's difficult to get through. It takes a lot of time. It's a good thing. Okay, so all those bad things being said, FedRAMP's a great thing. It allows organizations to service agencies and agencies to have peace of mind that people are following a playbook or a recipe book for success. So all the tough hurdles you have to get over to be FedRAMP compliant are worth it at the end of the day. And our organization is in pursuit of a FedRAMP certification like many others are. We've been delivering cloud services for many years to commercial customers, primarily virtual desktop technology to commercial customers.
Is there a integration between FedRAMP and the VDI and mobility? Because one of the interesting things when FedRAMP came up was the idea of, well, maybe we need a FedRAMP for mobile apps, and I thought that was an interesting concept. DHS has something called the car wash. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that. That's in many ways looking at the app to make sure it meets different standards, security 508. Is FedRAMP coming into play more and more as more agencies virtualize and move to the cloud and move to mobile?
Well, if you think about FedRAMP, really it's focused on the cloud provider themselves, right? So mobile applications can be delivered in a couple different ways. They can either be a native application that actually runs and executes on the mobile device, which would fall outside of the boundaries of FedRAMP. If the application, on the other hand, was virtualized and delivered to a mobile device, and the execution and computational space was in the cloud, then that would be require FedRAMP boundaries to be wrapped around it, right? There are standards around data and applications and how those applications store data on the mobile devices today. FISMA requirements. FIPS is an encryption standard that has to be followed. So there's a whole cadre of standards that you have to be aware of when you're delivering mobile technologies out of the cloud. So FedRAMP is just a piece of it, really.
Gary, let me turn to you about when you talk about clouds and you talk about virtualization and mobility. How do you decide what data goes in the cloud and which kind of cloud it is? Is it a private cloud, a public cloud, or a hybrid?
I mean, obviously there's an analysis that has to be done, right? And it's also a conversation with your customers. Because keep in mind, as an IT provider, I'm not the data owner. I'm a steward of that data, but I'm not that data owner. So I sit down and talk to the customers. We talk about, what are the risks? We talk about what kind of data are you dealing with? We talk about what kind of access do you need? So it's got to be a conversation, and really it's a case by case basis. I would caution anybody to say, oh, I'm just going to develop a quick flow chart and bang bang bang, I'll answer 3 questions and I'll know what the answer is, where I'm going to provide it. It's really a case by case basis, and really look at the data, look at the access, and have that conversation with your customer and the data owner to make sure that all of that's factored in before you make those decisions.
Joe.
Yeah, Jason, one of the things that we're doing with organizations like Gary's and like Mark's organization is doing a application suite rationalization exercise. So we're going through all of their applications with them, understanding how they operate, where they should execute, what the security posture needs to be, to determine what the most appropriate location for that application to execute is. Should it be execute on the endpoint? Should it be virtualized? Should it be rewritten and delivered through HTML5? all these things are need to be determined before you move forward and try to jump out into a cloud deployment of an application, right? And if you don't do it, then you set yourself up for failure. I think someone mentioned that earlier this morning. You have to be prepared and you have to plan, but more than anything, you have to understand how your applications operate and what the security needs to be, a posture of those applications.
Mark, let me turn to you real quick because you guys have some. Not only do you have the security to determine the risk factor, but because you're dealing with health information, that adds another layer of security to it. How do you do that application rationalization to say, okay, yes, this is a candidate, or no, this is not?
Yeah, I mean, I think the same thing we talked about and that Gary mentioned about the data ownership and the steward of that, right? I'm a steward, not the owner, right? I'm not the business line that owns that. So what we do is take requirements worksheets, right? We drill those down, look at that. And then from there, we look at some of those variables to say, does it need to be here, there? Does it need to be disconnected, connected? Does it need to be modified mainframe in a virtual type of stack environment? From that, it gains us a lot. So just like I guess you would in movie sets, right? Before you build the set, right? Storyboards. We do a lot of storyboarding now because it really helps with pictures translate to those people instead of a bunch of words that don't really mean anything. Like medical speak to me is different from IT speak to them, right? So it really shows for those use cases and characters, is this how you plan on using the data, consuming it? Yes. Okay, so great. Now I have a course of action, a vector that I can apply a cost to, right, and some risks to figure out where I need to be and where I need to put it so that they can utilize that. And so I think an ever-evolving process, but I think through a lot of the new software technologies, it allows me to architect not only the mandated views I need for, right, certification and accreditation, but allows me to create those user flow work stories that everybody can say from an IA perspective, from an IT perspective, from a business owner's perspective, that is what we want. And now there's a relative cost to that, to the value back. And I think that's what a lot of people miss about that. Like, I want mobile. I'm like, what's the value to the organization? Because we have a fiduciary responsibility for the taxpayers to ensure we're putting the right technology at the right place to the right person to, certify the mission or deliver that mission.
Ken, let me turn to you for a second. We're going to maybe take a step outside of security, but let's go down the path that Joe was talking about when application rationalization. Are you finding that customers understand the need to say which application is already suitable to maybe a mobile device and virtualization and which maybe needs to be changed, improved, customized even?
It's a case-by-case basis, but the answer is usually no. Most customers don't have the time or resources to redevelop every application they have to put on a mobile device. So the first thing they have to do is figure out, do I need to have a virtual desktop or just application virtualization or just a web page? There are many tools that already exist today, either in the cloud or just third-party products that can replicate the workflow of many of these in-house applications with minor tweaks just to the change of the workflow. I see that a lot. The other thing I see, this comes up a lot with desktop virtualization, is the first pass that every agency ever makes for desktop virtualization usually involves asking employees, do you use these apps? And they give them a list of all the apps that they have installed, and the reaction of every single employee is yes to every single app on the list without actually looking at the list. So everyone gets Adobe Acrobat Writer, everyone gets Visio, different things like that, which is not only a licensing nightmare, to cost the agency extra money for all the licenses, it just adds bloat to the application load and extra hassles of, well, I can't get this app to work with this app now but if the two apps aren't even needed, it could have been resolved by just looking at that.
And then you even talk about the versioning of apps, meaning version 2 versus version 3. Oh, yeah, I use them both.
That's another really interesting one that comes up a lot is macros in Excel, for example. Different versions of Excel. It's gotten better now, but in the past with Excel 2000 and Excel XP, the macro system was different. So you had to run different versions of the product of Excel for different business groups so they can run their different macros to go.
That's a huge challenge. I'm going to turn it back to Joe. Let's start off the last round here. Talk a little bit about the future. What should people think about as they're either going down the path already of virtualization and mobility, or they're just considering it? What are some of the best practices that you would say let's pass along to them? Well,
I think this is an encouraging time for all of us in the sense that virtualization is leading into a full HTML5 world, right? So now virtualization technology can re-render applications to be delivered to an HTML5 enabled browser. And therefore have a completely clientless experience. So all the major browsers support HTML5. It's really going to allow organizations to completely decouple themselves from devices that they had to manage in the past, and allow us to have a much more ubiquitous user experience across all the mobile devices that we have access to today. So that's really great.
All right, Gary.
So kind of touch on that. I would number one say that, as you embark down this path, make sure you really understand the current state. The technology has changed greatly. The second piece I would say is there's going to be costs that you're not going to anticipate. I don't care how great a planner you are, you're going to find things that you missed. You either missed capacity, you missed bandwidth, you missed something. So you have to understand that there's going to be costs that you're going to miss. But on the flip side, there are going to be benefits that you are not going to dream of. And as you start moving down the path and you start getting your customers involved, you're going to find use cases that, I don't care how much time you spend ahead of time trying to map out use cases, you're going to have your customers are going to surprise you as they start coming back and saying, hey, there's a benefit here and here's something that we never thought of. So, as you're looking at calculating your ROI, as you talk to your fellow executives and the CFO, be honest with them and say, look, I'm doing my best to calculate the cost. There's going to be hidden costs that I'm not going to capture, but I guarantee there's going to be hidden benefits that I'm not going to express today either.
All right, Ken.
Well, figure out why you want to take on the procedure. Have set goals in mind. Don't just, I want to virtualize or I want to go to cloud. Have a business goal. I want to provide this service to more people, or I want to do X. If you have a goal in mind and then figure out if virtualization or cloud is good for it, it tends to be more successful than trying to shoehorn something into the cloud or into virtualization.
All right, Mark, you got about 30 seconds.
Okay. Long-range city planning. Know what you need to do for the business, and then plan to execute to plan.
Wow, that was very good.
Thank you.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for listening to the Mobile Device Management Panel, Securing Your Agency's Information, sponsored by Accelera Solutions and NetApp on Federal News Radio 1500 AM. I'm your host, Jason Miller. Our guests today were Mark Gouge, Chief Technology Officer of the Defense Health Agency, Gary Barlett, Chief Information Officer of the Postal Service's Inspector General Office, Joe Brown, President of Accelera Solutions, and Ken Liska, Virtualization Solutions Specialist for U.S. Public Sector NetApp. If you missed any portion of this show, you can listen to its entirety and on demand at federalnewsradio.com.